Good morning. And today we have Dr. Destiny Nog. Welcome, Dr. Destiny Nog, and thank you so much for your time and for joining us. And let me introduce her first, and then we will move to her session. So Dr. Destiny Nog is a leader in energy justice and sustainable energy transitions trade-off analysis. In her role as an assistant professor in civil and environmental engineering and policy, she creates optimization and decision analysis tools which evaluate the sustainability, equity, and reliability of power systems in the US and sub-Saharan Africa. She has pioneered the development of algorithms to identify hidden forms of energy poverty, which is vital to achieving energy justice. Dr. Nock is the recipient of 6 NSF grants on energy, resilience, and energy justice. She holds a PhD in industrial engineering and operational research from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Destiny Nock, and it's you now. Please take on.
Okay, sweet. I will need you to unshare, if you please.
Yeah.
Awesome. So hi, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to come speak with you all today. Today, we're going to be talking about a recent paper that my group has published titled, technically the paper is titled Forgone Summertime Comfort as a Function of Avoid Electricity Use. But the big catchy tagline for this talk is Forgone Summertime Comfort, Energy Poverty in the Summer. And one of the reasons why I tend to focus on energy poverty, at least in the summertime, is because a lot of times when I talk with people about needs to deploy air conditioners and air conditioning technologies, it kind of is seen as a luxury good, right? Like, oh yeah, air conditioners are nice, but we don't always need those. But the thing is, with climate change, rising temperatures, I do believe that people's access to air conditioners is going to be something that can really either help or hinder a person's and household's ability to adapt to climate change. So let's make sure we all get on the same page about different types of energy inequities or layers of energy poverty. So here is my energy poverty sandwich. And at the bottom, we have resource-based energy poverty. So do you have electricity in your home? The second is reliability-based energy poverty. So is the supply of electricity reliable? And how many outages does that household have to deal with, either per day, per month, per year? Affordability. Can you afford to keep your house at a safe and comfortable indoor temperature? So that's, do you have high bills? What's the cost? What's the unemployment rate in your household? Energy insecurity in the sandwich has to deal with the, have you ever been at risk of being disconnected from your energy provider? So sometimes, if your bills are very high and you can't pay them, then you might actually be completely cut off from service. And then last but not least is environmental-based energy poverty. So do you have negative health impacts from the consumption or lack of consumption of energy? So for example, this might be like, do you live near a polluting plant? Are you burning trash in your home to stay warm? And with this sandwich, there are pieces that kind of mix and mingle. So for example, if you are energy insecure and you've been disconnected from your electricity provider, then you also now are facing resource-based energy poverty because you don't have electricity in your home. And you also have affordability challenges because actually purchasing that electricity was not affordable from your standpoint. And so there are a lot of new policies that are coming along to help households. One that I will just highlight here is the Justice 40 initiative, which states that 40% of the benefits from climate change investments need to go to disadvantaged communities. And one of the big questions is, what do we define as a benefit, right? And that is one of the things that has really guided a lot of my work of thinking, how do we quantify benefits? How can we measure the impact that different investments or lack of investments in households have on that actual household? And one of the reasons why I think that we need to really, strongly think about the quantification of benefits is because sometimes our laws negatively impact people and they have some unintended consequences. So for example, there are strict conservation laws that were a response to the oil embargo of the 1970s. So when oil became really high, and we couldn't get that much oil. Some utilities stated that some utility regulators stated that utilities had to work to reduce the consumption of energy. So here, PA or Pennsylvania Act 129 states that utilities legally cannot encourage households to use more energy. It was a law designed to promote energy efficiency, right? But the question is, well, who might be at risk under this policy? And one of the things that we have found when talking with different electric and gas utilities is that because of Pennsylvania Act 129, if a household does not have an air conditioner, legally, they cannot encourage someone to go buy one because that would lead to that household using more electricity. And that's one of the big challenges here with this law of, yes, doing energy efficiency is great, but that is not great when we are putting people at risk of heat stroke, heat illness, and being super susceptible to heat waves. So that's just the background of, some things that are motivating some of this work. Now, one of the largest ways that people measure energy poverty or energy insecurity in the United States and in a lot of developed countries is using energy burden. So energy burden is the percent of your income that you spend on your energy bills. Again, energy burden is the percent of your income that you spend on your energy bills. So in this graph, we have the income of the household on the x-axis. We have the energy burden on the y-axis. And we're looking at how the energy burden, so these numbers right here, change as we account for different things this household has to pay for. So here their gross income is around $51,000. And based on the energy bill of this house, we would say their energy burden is around 4.3%. But once we account for taxes, it rises to 6% after dwelling costs, because you have to have a house before you can pay for your energy bills, right? It gets closer to 9.7%. And then we have student debt, vehicle costs, commuting costs, digital communications, which became so needed during the pandemic, and groceries, because, it's typically good for people to eat every now and then. We actually see that the true fraction of energy burden in this house is around 32%. But there's something really key here. This is a 3-person household with no air conditioning. So they are already spending 32% of their disposable income, and they're not even able to cool their home in the summer. And so one of the things here that we see is that the cost of affording unaffordable energy is high, yet this household is invisible under the energy burden metric, because typically you're defined as energy poor under energy burden if you spend more than 6% of your income on your bills. But when we look at their gross income, they only spend 4% of their income on their bill. But again, they don't have an air conditioner, so there's a big chunk of time in the summer that they actually would not be spending money on one of the largest appliances in our houses. And just to give a bit of context, typically for electricity in your home, roughly 50 to 60% of the total electricity usage goes towards heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So that's why, you're going to see a really big price signal from the heating and cooling of a home. So what can we do about this? How can we measure it? So household meters are widely deployed, but super underutilized. And a household electricity meter is just a little box outside your apartment or outside your home, which measures how much electricity you are taking from the grid at a given time period. Sometimes these occur at a 15-minute time period. Some of them look at the monthly time period. So in 2021, the US had deployed around 111 million advanced smart metering infrastructure installations. This is roughly 69% of all houses having electric meters. Now, residential customers accounted for about 88% of total advanced metering installation. So one good thing about this is that both low income and high income households have meters widely deployed. Utilities are actually deploying these things to houses. And so this gives us a really, really good data set to see how much electricity are people using throughout the year. at a 15-minute and sometimes even like 5-second interval. So you get a really like high quality data set. So for our research process, what we do is we start with the household level utility data from those smart meters. We then match the household level data with a demographic survey. This is going to tell us information about the income, the race, some household characteristics. And then we also are gathering local temperature data. So we need to know the outdoor temperature so that we can then tie that to energy use. Here in this talk, I'm going to focus on calculating the slopes of energy usage over the summer. So we're going to be looking at how are people using energy as they're moving into heat wave territory. And then from that, we'll calculate the cooling slope gap to identify if there are any inequities in our system. Our study area is the greater Phoenix, Arizona area, which is in this red box in case some of you don't know where Arizona is. So just to give you a sense of the climate, it's very long, hot summers, and our analysis is of about 4,000 households in the Salt River Project region. And here, our assumption is that in the South, households have working air conditioning infrastructure. It's something the utility assumes, and so that's why we have that assumption here. So from our regression, so we do a 5-point regression analysis on each of the individual households, and that produces a graph like this for individual houses. So on the y-axis, we have our daily electricity consumption in kilowatt hours. On the x-axis, we have our daily mean outdoor temperature in Fahrenheit. And what we get is a heating slope. So how are you using energy as you're moving into the winter? The heating balance point was the first outdoor temperature at which you turn on your heating system. The base load here, it's going to tell us all of our non-temperature dependent energy use. So that's going to be your refrigerators, your cooking, your water heating, your lighting, all the things that you use throughout the year, regardless of how hot or cold it is outside. Then we have our cooling balance point. This is the first outdoor temperature at which you would turn on your cooling or air conditioning system. And then the cooling slope gives us information about how you are using your cooling system as you're moving deeper into the summer and deeper into heat wave territory. Now, our previous work focused on the cooling balance point, the first temperature at which you turn on your cooling system. And so what we did there, and if you want the papers, these are the two papers from our previous work, Kong et al. 2022 and Huang et al. In 2023. So we have electricity usage in households on the y-axis. We have outdoor temperature on the x-axis. This is our high-income household in blue. And we found the cooling balance point. Again, that's the first outdoor temperature at which a household turns on their AC unit. Then we mapped the lowest income households, and you see that in black. And we found the difference. So we found the gap in cooling between low and high income groups. And we found that this was between a 4 to 7 degree Fahrenheit gap, meaning that if like high income households are turning on their air conditioners at around 75 degrees outside on average, then low income households might turn on their air conditioners on average around 82 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So that's a pretty decent sized gap. And so then the next thing that we needed to do was to estimate the difference in these slopes, right? So our low income groups using a lot less, even as they move deeper into the summer time period. So what we did was we estimated electricity consumption of the lowest income group, which is level 1. So level 1 are those that make less than $15,000 a year. And just to give you some context, if you made minimum wage in the United States, working a full-time job, you would make $15,080. Our highest income households are those that make $150,000 or more throughout the year. And then what we did first was we said, okay, well, let's assume that these two households or these two household groups turn on their cooling systems around the same temperature, so around 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, and also that they have the same baseload temperature, the same baseload energy consumption at around 25 kilowatt hours. And so then the difference in cooling slopes that we found for income groups 1 and 8 led to a 28.6% gap in electricity consumption at a 95-degree Fahrenheit temperature outdoors. So on average, at 95 degrees Fahrenheit, even if they turn on their cooling systems at the same time period, the lowest income group would be using roughly 30% less energy, less electricity than the highest income group. And so you might be asking yourself, well, how hot is this really? Like, why 75? Why does that even matter? Well, in Arizona, when we're looking at a cooling balance point, so that first turn on point of about 78 degrees Fahrenheit, the maximum outdoor temperature, as reported in the Phoenix Airport weather station in 2022, was around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So even though the daily mean temperature is 78 degrees Fahrenheit, the maximum temperature is 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that really does highlight that people actually can be at risk depending on how much shading their house has, their building characteristics, if they have insulation in their homes, and if they have medical needs, right? And so that's why, even though 78 degrees might sound low, actually the high temperature of the day is going to be much higher than that. So then what we did was we compared it with energy burden. So here we have energy burden on the y-axis. And again, that's the percent of your income that you spend on your energy bills. On the x-axis, we have the income groups where 1 is the lowest and 8 is our highest income group. And then this first plot here represents those with a low cooling slope. So this can be houses that don't have a centralized air conditioning system. They can be houses with window units or just fans, for example. So one of the things that we notice here is that households with low cooling slopes tend to have energy burdens less than 10% for almost all income groups, meaning that when we use energy burden as the main mechanism for determining who's energy poor, we're missing everyone who doesn't have an air conditioning unit. This is huge, right? I mean, there's so many houses here in our lowest income group that have higher energy burdens relative to people similar to them in this population. But because they just literally cannot use energy, they're missed in our energy poverty assessments and our identification methods for who needs help. And I should have said that this black one here, this black is going to be the cooling balance point of less than 78 degrees Fahrenheit. So these are going to be people that turn on their cooling systems before the outdoor temperature gets above a maximum of 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And then this orange here, these are the cooling balance points above 78 degrees Fahrenheit. So these are going to be houses that wait beyond the maximum temperature getting above 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside to start turning on their air conditioning or cooling systems. So then if we go to houses that have really high cooling slopes, so they're going to be houses that most likely have centralized air conditioning systems or a lot of window units, for example, we see that the 10% energy burden threshold now has a lot more houses above it, particularly in our lowest of the low income group region. And again, higher cooling slopes tend to indicate that they have working infrastructure, but they might not have insulation, right? And so when we are actually thinking about how to help these different households, this information can say, hey, for the low cooling slope households, maybe these are people that need air conditioners. They just need the energy infrastructure in the first place. But on the other hand, if you have houses with really high cooling slopes, then we might say, hey, most likely they already have an air conditioning system, but what they need is either bill assistance, so help paying their bills, or they need help to purchase a more efficient system, which can then take down those cooling slopes and also reduce the amount that they're spending on their bills. So given that I just mentioned energy efficiency as one of the mechanisms that can help, we did try to take a look at how AC efficiency differences might lead to different cooling slopes. So here we have in plot A, we have a SEER rating of less than 14. So that would indicate that the house is going to have a pretty inefficient system. And it has only one air conditioning unit as told to us by the utility. And so this has roughly 201 households in our sample size. Cooling slope is on the y-axis, income group is on the x-axis. And what we see here is that the slope gap between group 1 and group 8 is around 0.74 kilowatt hours per degree Fahrenheit. And then when we looked at really efficient systems, we do see that overall people are having slightly smaller cooling slopes, right? So SEER here of 14 to 30, that represents a pretty efficient unit. But we see a similar slope gap between our lowest and highest income groups of about 0.76. And so here, this does highlight to us that it's not just a technology gap of the efficiency of the different technologies being the driver of these gaps, but it's actually an income-based gap, which highlights a greater system level inequity. Now, you might be wondering to yourself, what does even 0.74 even mean, right? Like, how big of a difference is that? So for a small window unit in one room, this would have a cooling slope of about 0.1 kilowatt hours per degree Fahrenheit. So these gaps here are about 7 window unit difference, right? So it's one could indicate that people just don't have like the amount of money to basically consume what would be roughly 7 small window units. But again, we did hold the number of ACs constant in each of these plots that I'm showing you right now. Each of these plots are households that just have one air conditioning unit. And so again, that's why we say, given that they have similar technologies, given that, we have controlled for efficiency rating, it does seem like income is the primary driver here. So just to give you a quick summary of our Kwong et al. 2023 paper, we had electricity usage in households on the Y, we had outdoor temperature on the X, and we looked at the different slopes here to find the gap between high and low income households. And we found that roughly there was a wide gap where low-income houses are consuming 28% less energy throughout the summer season when you actually put them at a similar cooling balance point. And so one of the things that, I believe that this work can help with as we are thinking about energy justice and our energy transitions is how multiple insecurities and energy poverty indicators can really help us think about who is impacted in the energy system. So here I have households in the Salt River Project region, and the blue is just the total. The orange represents energy burden, where the threshold is set to above 6%. The red represents cooling balance points. So this is going to be the first outdoor temperature at which you turn on your air conditioning system. And then the cooling slope here is going to be if a household has a cooling slope less than 0.1, which again would indicate that the cooling slope of less than 0.1 indicates that the household most likely doesn't even have a small window unit. So for high energy burden, these households most likely have working energy infrastructure or centralized AC, but they might not have insulation. For energy limiting behavior early in the season, this can be delaying turning on the air conditioner until late in the summer. And then the green here is energy limiting behavior throughout the season. So they have a broken or no air conditioning system. And this is super important because in Salt River Project's region in Arizona, the driving assumption for all of their households is that they have working air conditioning systems. And we are saying, hey guys, that's not the case. And it's something that is very vital to communicate, one, to utilities, and two, just as we're planning the energy system, because in the survey that Salt River Project used to give us this information, they asked households if they had 1, 2, or 3 air conditioning units. They did not ask households if you just didn't have one in the first place, or if yours was broken. And the thing is, we can see how this changes over multiple years in the region in particular. So we have 2016 through 2019. And one of the things that we notice I'll just highlight this first one in 2016, is that there's minimum overlap between our different circles. And that is something that should be taken into account, that people who are experiencing different types of vulnerabilities and different types of energy injustices need to be helped in different ways. It's not just going to be about giving everyone bill assistance. It's not just going to be about giving everyone energy efficient air conditioning units, but it's really going to be targeted to, or need to be targeted to, the different inequities that people are facing. So one of the big things here is that we need to rethink our conservation laws that might have unintended consequences. So for example, PA Act 129, as I mentioned before, states utilities cannot encourage households to use more energy, but there are times when houses should use more energy, particularly if it means that they can protect their occupants against heat waves. And even in 2021, we do see that that places change. So Minnesota changed their conservation law in 2021 to account for electrification. Because, this law, if the PA Act 129, if a natural gas household was trying to change to electric stoves and even to institute an electric vehicle charging, a charging component at their home, technically this law says that the utilities cannot encourage them to do that. And so now that's why you see places like Minnesota and some other places with these strict laws now making some modifications for electrification. So one thing that these metrics can do is they can help decision makers strive to identify infrastructure gaps in low-income households, identify the impact of strict conservation laws, and even in high heat areas, we did find that air conditioning consumption gaps occurred because houses were limiting their energy use, and that also hinders their ability to protect themselves against heat waves and extreme temperatures. So I would like to thank my SPICE team there we go. I'd like to thank my SPICE team. So these are all the researchers that are helping me throughout this research agenda. And I thoroughly enjoy working with all of them. And then I would like to also thank the Sloan Foundation for funding this work. And so here's my contact information. Follow me on Twitter if you're still on Twitter, or X, I guess now that it's called. And if you want to know more about some of the work, this is our link to our paper. In the paper, we looked at household size. We looked for differences in like the square footage of homes. And so that can also be another source of information, given that the talk had limited time. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nock. It was a great talk. And definitely your insights are really valuable for all of us who are trying to understand this issue. Guys, we are open for the question and answers. If you have any questions, please post in the question and answer session. I'm going to take to the Dr. Nock. Let me check.
Maybe everyone's asleep.
Yeah. So let's go with my question first then. So you were showing this plot where you have this heating slope and cooling slope, and you said like you guys collected the data from the household meters, right?
Yes.
So I'm wondering like, do they are smart meters, but have like what I imagine is like from the smart meters we can get the household load profiles, or if the smart meters are connected with some kind of energy management system, then you can have all this record, how much energy HVAC was using or the heating system was using and all those prices. But like, I just want to know like which kind of data you guys have collected from these meters and how you separated this like cooling and heating load from this data.
So for the data, we do not actually have appliance data. So when I got this graph here, this is purely for the total household energy consumption. And that is why we use this 5-point regression technique to pull out this heating component, the base load, and the cooling component, because again, we don't actually have information on the specific appliances in the home. Most utilities have not gone in and done that piece. But the reason that we are able to use the 5-point regression and get this summary statistic is because, again, the heating and cooling system should represent 50% of the energy consumption for a home. And so when you are mapping the consumption against the outdoor temperature, when you have things in the home, the heating use and the cooling use should really be the main driver of changes in energy use for different temperatures. So, I've had questions in the past about like, well, what if somebody has a pool, right? Like then I'm like, well, they're not actually the disparity that I'm really looking at. If they have a pool, normally, if you have like a pool with a heating component, right, that will give you a strong uptake in the summer. So that can kind of, make some noise in this model. But again, like the heating component, it depends on like if the pool's indoors, outdoors, how big the pool is, right? What temperature you're heating it to. So that's something that we just kind of acknowledge as a limitation of our analysis. But for the majority of the homes in Arizona, I don't actually know the percent of homes that have pools. But in the actual house, the heating and cooling component uses roughly 50 to 70, sometimes 70% of the total energy use of the home. And so that's why, we felt confident that we were actually finding the cooling and heating components in the base load from just the household level energy use.
Just a related question. So when you say like you have collected all these houses, so is there like is it a category of the houses, like you get this data from the low income or disadvantaged communities, or is just like the houses, all the houses, they can be low income or high income, like it's just a mix kind of houses? Because
So
I
it's a
imagine like in the low income houses, maybe people don't have, as you said, even don't have ACs, but in the high income houses, maybe people have EVs too. And this is kind of a then in the load profile would be kind of very different when you get this information from the load profile. Then it cannot account all those other variables.
Yeah, so for the actual houses, that did come from the utility. So they were the ones that kind of gave us, but we do have a range of demographics in our study. So just like as an example, let me see if I have so just like as I was trying to pull up another PowerPoint because I actually have the demographics
Okay.
displayed for that. But we do have a range of like household age. We have a range of income. Oh, here it is. So if I unshare this,
Mhm.
stop sharing that, and then I can share this other one. Sorry, but it's just like, oh, I have
Oh,
a perfect answer to that. Okay, so let's see, here we go. I share my screen. All right. So for the Salt River Project region, they did give us the demographics. So they actually have a very detailed survey, and they will actually kind of give you this. So we have racial demographics here across different income groups. So you will see that, our like income group 1 is the lowest amount that we have. We have roughly 300 houses, and then we kind of have like this almost normal distribution to income group 8. But our 3 lowest categories, we feel like we have a decent representation of some of those. And then, we also have that across age groups as well. And so here for ages, right, we had even within the income group 1, so the colors represent different age group categories, and we do see that we have age groups across within each of the income groups as well. Right. And so that was something that we were really looking at of, okay, what's our distribution across income? What's our distribution across race and age? And then how is that going to feed into the analysis? And so we're not kind of leaning towards one or the other income group. We do feel that we have a good enough range to be able to make some statistically significant conclusions.
thank you. So we have a question in chat from Ovis. So he said, like, one would assume that low-income households would opt for low-efficiency cooling systems. Did you see is did you see a such correlation, and what policy measures can be used to overcome
What policy measures can reduce what?
them?
So I think for policy measures trying to overcome having less efficient systems, like, having what's it called, deployment programs for heat pumps, for example, is one way to help improve the efficiency of both the heating and provide cooling on that side of things, which I think can be very valuable, particularly for low-income houses. But really thinking about the way that we deploy those policies is going to be key. So for example, like sometimes people have asked, like, what if we do tax rebates? And it's like, well, a lot of low-income households actually don't have a big tax basis, right? So doing a tax rebate doesn't take down the high upfront cost of um, needing to purchase a new appliance, right? And so that can be one thing. And then sometimes, the barrier can actually be that the low income group doesn't actually own their home, right? And so being able to actually switch out your infrastructure can be a bit of a challenge if you don't own your home, because you would need to get the approval from your landlord. But depending on how quickly you can get that appliance out there and installed, some people might not be willing to go without, heat or air conditioning for a little bit. So sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge when we get into the actual policy deployment piece.
The next question is, some of the differences in cooling slopes may also be attributed to the size of the household. How do you control for that variance?
So when we were looking at the size of the houses, we did in our paper do like looking at just like what the household size looked like, and trying to control for that. But again, for our regression, those are done on individual homes, right? So, I don't actually have to control for the house size in the regression because it stays the same throughout the whole year for an individual home, right? And so that it's really just to say, like, broadly speaking, when are people turning on and off their systems, and then how are they using them as temperatures change? Now, I will say that that has been something that people have asked in the past of, like, what about energy use intensity? And, like, do low income groups tend to live in smaller homes? And the thing is, I will say that the correlation that really kind of drives the difference sometimes is not the size as much, because the size is going to affect the base load, right? Like the size is really going to impact like how much extra energy you just use throughout the entire year, right? But low-income houses tend to live in older homes, and older homes have worse insulation and sometimes no insulation. And so because the lack of insulation allows air to escape from the home easier, allows heat to escape, it allows cooling to escape, it allows the heat and the cooling from the outside to get into your home a lot quicker, right? That actually makes the entire housing structure less efficient than a newer based home. Also different older materials, different building codes, leaky roofs, bad windows. Those are going to be the building components that really, really affect the slopes. In my opinion, more than just the size of the home. I think when we take it to the size of the home, we really miss this super important discussion about quality of your house and quality of the materials in your house. So I can give you just an example. When I moved to Pittsburgh straight out of grad school, I moved in a 100-year-old house. And during COVID, I hated working from my kitchen. And I have recently learned that my kitchen has absolutely no insulation whatsoever. And so it just feels cold. Like if I'm in my kitchen in the winter, like I need my jacket, I need a blanket, I need my slippers and a hat. Like it is really cold in that part of the house. And we also have our kitchen pipe freeze often. Luckily, the pipe hasn't burst, But I don't know what it is on the front side of our house. It has like some other houses next to it. The wind, maybe it just isn't as strong, but that one tends to be a little bit warmer. And so that really can affect just not only how much money you have to spend on your heating and cooling system, but just how often it needs to run. And so really the quality of the house is in the quality of insulation in your walls is going to be a huge factor. And so house size, house size I think is easier to quantify, but house age I think can also give us a little bit more indication about the risk that people might be facing and how much extra money they're gonna have to spend.
So the next question is on the issue of gross income being used to calculate energy burden. Is there a recommended method or replacement metric to better reflect household expenses?
So I would advocate for using disposable income as opposed to gross income when calculating energy burden, because there are a lot of things that you have to pay for before you can pay for your energy bills. So you have to pay for your house first. If you don't pay your rent, you won't have an energy bill because you won't have a house, right? And so I think that to me, when I've seen proposals for net energy burden, which is based on net income. So after people get their taxes taken out, after people pay their rent, I mean, to me, I think that that is a better indicator of how much people are actually spending. But I do think that we need to have different energy burden categories given the different appliances that you have in your home. So for example, if you have an electric vehicle in your house, or electric vehicle charging station attached to your house, you will spend more money on electricity. You just will, right? Because you have more appliances. Does that mean that those people need more bill assistance than somebody that has to pay for their gas at the pump? I don't think so, right? I think that we need different categories depending on the different types of appliances you have in your home. If you have a natural gas-based heating home versus an all-electric based heating home, they will have very different energy burdens because in the summertime, in the wintertime, the electric heating home is going to just use a lot more, but we don't know what the natural gas home, right, how much that's going to occur, and that's going to have their energy bills. And the same thing for air conditioners. If someone actually has an air conditioning system, they will spend a lot more money on their bills. But if they don't, right, that doesn't mean that they don't need help paying for their energy, right? Maybe they need enough help to actually be able to buy an air conditioning system. That's a really complicated way. But if you want the easy answer for how to change energy burden, I do think it should be on disposable income, not just gross income.
Okay. And the next question is, were there any challenges or difficulties in getting meter data at the household level?
Yes, you
Yeah.
have to have a partnership with the utility. And one of the biggest challenges is going to be customer privacy concerns. All utilities have those, right? And so that can be a bit of a challenge with trying to get this type of data. And the other challenge is that it's a very large data set. So as I mentioned, some of these meter data come in at like the 5-second interval, and then you have to aggregate up. Thinking about what spatial resolution to look at can be a bit of a challenge, and it is a large data processing problem. Now, there are some utilities that allow you to buy their data, but again, it depends on what utility you're looking at, if they have rules and regulations around that, and then connecting it to the household demographics can be another challenge. So just as an example, like Salt River Project did not give us any address or location data. And so you can imagine that that can make it a little bit difficult to think about, well, what's the best weather station to use when looking at these households? We don't get to look at the urban heat island effect. We don't get to compare outdoor temperatures versus thermostat temperatures, right? And so that can be a little bit of a challenge with trying to come up with some of these key findings. And so, as a researcher, you got to do the best with what you have. Any data set that you get is never going to be perfect. There's always going to be one thing that you really, really want. But given the overall data set and given, this compared to other things I've seen in the literature, I do think that if you can get your hands on smart meter data, doing it at a greater time resolution, doing the analysis on households as close to the household as you can get is very valuable.
It's a relevant question to the data. So in Arizona, probably, I think so, like many houses should have solar system. I can imagine because like their solar radiation kind of is very high. So when you get this data from smart meters, probably this data, the load profile, like the net, do you guys have any issues to separate this energy going to the grid and then they are getting from the grid? Like, is the load profiles were separate than the net energy to the grid, or is it like the same thing?
So that's a great question. For me, I just have how much energy I think is being taken from the grid. So if I wanted to determine if it was a solar based, if it was a household with solar, one way to do that is actually to look at a really sunny day and a really cloudy day in the region and just see, is there a drop? Right. And like, depending on how big the drops are, depending on how consistent it is, you can get that information. But for me, I just looked at electricity versus temperature, outdoor temperature. And so I was not looking at like a time series of data, right? So if you're looking at time series of just like how much energy are they using over the year, then you might see like cloudy, 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 sunny, cloudy, 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 sunny, right? And that's normally how we would look to see if it was like a solar based home. But then you will get into some complicated things because it's like, well, is that a vacation? You don't know, right? Is that like just getting a different appliance? Then you also are going to get into the question of, do they have electric vehicles or not, right? And so I believe that that's a good thing to have. But again, it goes back to this need of like, we need to actually know what appliances people have, right? Like if we really want to know how people are using energy and if they are using energy and electricity in the way that we would expect, we need to have information about the appliances in their home. But most utilities do not do this. And that's one of the reasons we started with Salt River Project, because they actually did a household survey. When we have worked with other utilities, and like for example, ComEd, for example, they had nothing but the location of the home and the zip code and the actual energy that they use. No income, no race, no age, no household size, no household age. Like there was nothing. And so while I totally hear you that, understanding like solar and charging is important, I think that there are some data sets that are way far away from where we need to be just to do like a basic like income based analysis, right? And so I do think that advocating for greater data standards when people are trying to make these decisions is going to be something that's going to be needed moving forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nock, and thank you so much for coming. And we take an hour from you. And this was a really great talk. And thanks for your valuable insights. I hope to see you soon.